We really trashed the ancient wargame rules, Men of Bronze, in our recent review. And Matt, did you have fun? No.
No fun.
Oh.
It was, I mean, that's an Osprey book, so it's like a good time a couple times, but I would not continue.
Yeah. So, we decided to give the rules author a chance to fight back.
And folks that have a long history of historicals are not as friendly about it.
Well, we learned a few things from him in this rules review response video. Let us have it, Eric. Well, here we are in Mark's game room, and we have with us Eric Farrington. Welcome, Eric, to the game room. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here. I really love the channel, and I think you guys are doing great work.
Well, that's so nice of you to say after we basically didn't have a nice video about Men of Bronze. But I want to say, like, we took that very seriously when we did that review because it wasn't so positive, especially Matt. Really, like, I think he, beat himself up forever on that. And in the comments, you said, I believe it was, ouch. But you were here if you wanted to talk, and we thought, why not? And there actually were some other people that suggested to us in the comments, yeah, take Eric up on it and talk with him. And so here we are. Get a bat, throw some tomatoes at us, whatever you want to do. Like, take your swing. So first of all, I guess I would just say, Eric, what did you think of the review in general? Was it good, bad? Do you think you got it right or wrong? And how would you respond to us, first of all?
Yeah, so I think, in the comment I said, ouch, because I was really hoping to get more than 3 pros out of it. But, that's the way it goes. But as far as the feedback in general, I don't think what you said was wrong or off base. Honestly, when I looked at the feedback I've received from others and where I've gotten from other places, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty in line with what other folks have said. What I've generally seen is folks who are coming from a more sci-fi, fantasy, not historical, and want to transition to historical have had pretty positive things to say. And folks that have a long history of historicals are not as friendly about it. I think my favorite review, there's an Amazon review that I printed out and I posted on my wall that says, this is not worth the paper it's written on. I was like, okay, I guess I should have put it out in more PDF formats. I don't know. So there you go.
All right, guys. Well, what do you think? Is it scale agnostic or not? Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, it claims to be scale agnostic. So I
want to ask
the
you about
images,
this. I make a big thing right off the front of the video, the review, saying like, hey, these rules said you can use any basing. I thought about that, and we tried what we did. We used 2 DBA bases, and it really wasn't working. And then I thought, well, maybe you need to use like 12 bases because your units are like 12 guys, right? So I was like, well, if you use 12 bases, would it work? But then I thought, yeah, but that's my entire DBA army to have 1 unit. And so then it kind of started falling down with like, I can't use this with the collections I have.
So, as historical gamers, one of the things that drives me nuts about historical, and I actually find as a barrier of entry, is basing and rebasing. Can't stand it, right? I think we all have felt the pain of that. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I want to make a scale and model agnostic game because really this Men of Bronze is a huge exercise in justifying me buying a whole bunch of models from Victrix, right? That's pretty much how it started. I'm like, hey, those are cool. I need to find a reason to buy those. So that's where I started. I spent a lot of time agonizing about how can I make this scale and model agnostic? And I ended up on, okay, each unit's going to have a leader at the front, middle of the unit. And that's what we're going to use to determine, measurements for movement, line of sight, pretty much the focal point of the unit, I said. And honestly, in Men of Bronze, I don't think I did a really great job articulating how this really works. Because even like the use of, I say, base width, and people are always like, well, my bases are, 20 millimeters, so that means how far I'm like, well, yes, technically, but really when I say base width, I just mean measurement unit. It doesn't matter what the actual distance is or how wide your bases actually are. Just more like, hey, some distance that fits for your table and the size of models that you're using. Right. So when I wrote Wars of the Republic, I took a lot of the feedback from Men of Bronze, and applied it to Wars of the Republic to try and clarify that. So I think I did a much better job articulating how to use the different bases. Because really, when I talk about, I spill a lot of ink in Men of Bronze about the leaders in the center and focal points and do this and that. But really, it's just like, yeah, go to the center front of your base and measure from there. That's it. That's really, I could have summarized like 3 pages of rules in one sentence. But hindsight's 2020.
Right? Because if you're talking, it's 8 figures. You don't make a phalanx of 8 figures, right? 8 guys don't make a phalanx. They should move any way they want.
Even worse, in our playtesting, we had
the other thing that a lot of people had a really tough time with, and I think it even comes up in the videos. Like I say in the book, I used when I was playing it, like 10 models, and 5 in each row, and that's a phalanx. And obviously that's ridiculous. No phalanx is that small. And even the footprint on the field of battle is going to be bigger than that on the footprint on our tabletops. But really, I was like, okay, I want to be able to have big battles, but I don't want to have to paint 300 to 500 miniatures in 28 millimeter scale. So how do I, to use an old fashioned term, how do I bathtub this so that I can have big battles and only have to paint maybe 50 guys as opposed to 500? Because I can paint 50 guys in a year. I can't paint 500 28 millimeter guys in a year. So that bathtubbing has actually been relatively challenging for folks overall. That's another area where I've gotten a lot of confusion about how does this work, because I purposely don't put in any like time scales or measurement scales or model scales or one model equals X amount of people, because that wasn't the type of game I wanted. In a sense, I wanted to be a little bit more cinematic in nature than that.
But the one thing I'm going to say about the Arete points is that they're a real great game mechanic, but I'm not sure what they represent in ancient warfare. So a really great fun game mechanic, but I feel like you could use it in World War II, black powder, whatever you want. So
okay, how do you translate these themes into mechanics? The Arete points and things like that came across pretty strongly. I know, Mark, you were like, you could port this to any period. And as I thought of it, I'm like, yeah, you're right. But when I was first thinking about the mechanic, I mean, the reason they're called Arete points is because the whole idea of Greek leadership was to inspire their followers to the higher purpose or the higher calling, so to speak. So I'm like, okay, this is a command and control mechanic where the leader can then basically inspire his troops to do something more than just shoot, move, fight, to do those special actions. And then that wasn't it wasn't super innovative. I really stole the idea from Daniel Mercy's like Dux Bellorum, right? I'm like, hey, that's really cool. He has leadership tokens, and I just expanded on it. And that's kind of my philosophy is don't try and innovation in my mind is overrated, right? Because at a certain point, if you get too far from what gamers are used to, they'll be like, what is this? And just reject it.
What do you think? Yeah. What do you think, Austin?
Yeah. So just going off what you said, you have an ancient battle where you have lines of troops who are supposed to be supporting each other on the left and right. I mean, that was the whole point, really. Right. And then, the support rules were something that, as a club, we were very curious, like, what was the inspiration behind writing them the way that you did? But just generally curious about having support where units move behind, an attacking unit.
Brutal.
I know, but it was a big point that we talked about. So
it was.
And honestly, this is probably the biggest piece of feedback I get, constructive feedback I get is support rules. What were you thinking? So my thought process was when my design goals for the game, my first design goal was make it fun. And then the question is, great, how do you make it fun? My answer to that question is you have to have meaningful choices and trade-offs during the game, right? Because if a unit can, shoot every turn, guess what? They're going to shoot every turn. If there's no penalty to not shoot, they're just going to do it. So I'm like, okay, so how do I make I played a lot of ancient games, and especially as hoplite armies, and they get kind of grindy, right? They're just like, I hate to say it, but like Yahtzee. You're just fishing for crits in some cases, right? So I'm like, okay. I mean, that's kind of the nature of hoplite warfare, is pushing and shoving. So I'm like, how do I make this interesting and force some decision making instead of just, rolling dice and hoping you do better than the other guy? So I'm like, okay, I have to have some sort of support mechanic. So I created one. Why then do you force them to move all the way from next to them to behind them? That leaves huge gaps in your battle line. That makes no sense. Who would do that? Well, that's part of the choice. Is it worth doing that? Right. But the second piece is, when I read about, Greek hoplite combat, and at the time, a big prevailing theory was it was just a pushing match. So you can't really push people very well from the side, and you can't really push very well from other angles. So you really should be behind the people you're trying to push, in that theory of hoplite combat. So that's what I decided to do. And there's a technical wargaming term for that type of thing, and I don't even remember what it is because I'm not a professional. I'm just some guy. But that's what I decided to do. And I actually went through playtesting and other stuff, and it didn't really come up in playtesting as being a big pain point for people. And I was like, well, why is it a pain point afterwards? And I realized, well, it's because the people I was playtesting with, they're not as big into ancient history as I am. Right? They're just like, oh, you've got a game? Okay, I'll play it.
What you just said about the support rule being about the pushing, right? That was nowhere in my mind when I looked at how the game was. Like, I never even thought about, oh, hey, maybe, Matt, you're wrong. Maybe it's about them pushing. Like, that wasn't even anything I thought about. So I think that's an interesting thing where, you're seeing it and then it's translating into the rule, but in the we're losing something in the translation there.
Yeah. And as feedback, there are rules that will give designers intent at the bottom. Some of those rules aren't great, but I think that's sometimes a useful thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to get, as a way of connecting with the author, you get an understanding of, especially something that I would say that your support mechanic, we thought it was flawed, but it is innovative. I haven't seen it before. So that's the kind of thing that I think is deserving of like a description on your part of, this is what I meant by this. This is my take on ancient warfare and why this is relevant to it. Yeah. So that's I had not, as Mark had not, I had not considered that at all.
So that's
a very interesting take on that.
I'm glad you asked that and put him on the spot.
The other piece that a lot of people give feedback on the support mechanic is like, okay, you go to support, but then it's all or nothing, right? If your support fails and you lose, well, there goes your army. I'm like, yep. Better think about if you really want to support that attack or not, or if you have some other plan.
In our club, right, because our clubs have style. Our style is, I would never risk that. Yeah. You would never risk that. Yeah. So we just don't use it. Yeah. And so that's why we ended up just not using it. 8 guys don't make a phalanx. They should move any way they want.
Even worse, in our playtesting, we had multiple situations where you break a phalanx in the same move, have it move this crazy wonky way to rear attack or flank another unit, and form phalanx just before they do it, all in one activation.
But you see, that's what makes it. That's what makes it. That's what makes it.
Movement. Okay, so I specifically wanted to make it so phalanxers were mostly going straight, and everybody else could pretty much do what they wanted, just to draw a contrast between the two unit types, right? Yeah, so there's a lot of benefits to being in a phalanx. So why wouldn't everybody just constantly be in a phalanx all the time? There must be some reason. I'm like, okay, so the contrast I'm trying to draw is these guys have free movement. They can run around and do weird stuff. They can move around in ways that a phalanx could only dream of. Now, it did come up in playtesting, and Matt, I think you brought this up, where, well, what if you just break your phalanx, go move around crazy, and then just reform the phalanx, and then do the charge? And it came up in playtesting, and I really considered, well, should I do something about that? And ultimately, I decided not to. And the reason I chose not to was because I was like, well, you had the arete points and the leadership points. You just sunk a whole lot of them into that maneuver. And it better work, or you're going to be in trouble. But so, yeah. So that was kind of why I decided to overall, at the end of the day, just leave it, as opposed to create some special case or rule around it. I'm as much as possible, I tried to avoid creating special rules around things. I wanted to make it a permissive system in the sense that the only thing that the rules would give you bonuses if you did the quote unquote right things, but if you didn't, there weren't negatives.
Is in the back of the rule book, right? There are scenarios. And I think that, unfortunately, that shows you the problem with the game, because it has the kind of generic scenarios that I am sure, and don't quote me on this, but I'm sure, you know, like the game designer played and put in there. But then I'm sure for saleability and marketability, he put in like marathon.
You had kind of a, I think we mentioned in the video, we have a kind of a range of scenario types that we observed in the book. And we didn't really get a chance to try a lot of the ones that came first, the sort of smaller scale, get the sheep, what have you scenarios.
Yeah.
Was there sort of a trajectory to how you designed those, where some of them came first, some of them came later? Or did you kind of just envision this as a mass battle game from the beginning?
Oh, okay.
This is a great question, and it really gets to the heart of a lot of confusion about the game. The game is designed to be a unit versus unit game, not a model versus model game. Now, does it always come across super great that way? No. But when I designed the game, I was thinking about, okay, you look at reconstruction of a battle in a book, you know, and you see these little boxes that they move around, and they're basically footprints. It's like, this box is a whole legion. You're like, a legion had a checkerboard formation, blah, blah, like, but it's just this box on the map. So I actually kind of designed the game to try and mimic that boxes moving around the map a little bit. That was the intention. Did it always come across that way? Maybe not always, but that was the idea, to be unit versus unit, and to be, and that's why there's no model removal, because it doesn't matter. The unit is always the unit until the unit is not the unit anymore. That's why collapse tests work the way they do. That's why wavering works the way it does, is because it was designed to be unit versus unit.
I think where Men of Bronze really fits well, actually, in our hobby, is if you're someone that wants to do something like Clash of Spears, but you don't want all the you want it to be on a lighter side. Like, you have new gamers in your club, like, that just want something easier, or it's Thanksgiving and your in-laws want to try something. You know, no offense there. I think Men of Bronze is a great kind of entry game for that, because it is kind of, you just play and there's no tracking, except for the rotate points, which I think is the highlight of the game. So I do think that is where Men of Bronze kind of fits. So.
Well, I think you're right, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's kind of who it was designed for, in a sense. People transitioning from other types of wargaming to historical, and ancients especially, because ancients can be kind of obtuse sometimes when you look at it from the outside. And like you mentioned, Napoleonics. I would love to do the Napoleonics, but I'm flat out afraid to get into Napoleonics, because I'm like, if I don't have a mentor to help guide me, I'm going to mess it up, and then that'll cost me a lot of money that'll have to go back and repaint or rebase or do a whole bunch of things differently.
Eric, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for being so kind to our negative review, but I'm really glad that you chatted with us. I mean, I kind of have a better sense kind of Men of Bronze and where you are with it. Yeah. I really look forward to new projects from Eric. Right? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm actually, let's play some Men of Bronze, you know?
Yeah.
So is there going to be fun now, Mr.
Yes,
No Fun?
it can be fun.
Yeah.
No, it can be fun. For sure.
Yeah.
And we've got to try it single based.
What was that?
Oh, we have to try. We have never tried it with individually based miniatures. That was my greatest regret in that first filming, was that we never even we didn't talk about how we hadn't tried it with single based miniatures, and I think that that's important to giving it a chance.
And one last plug: when we did the marathon video, we had our two gamers, right, JT and Joe. They had never played it. They didn't even know what it was. I just said, "You're coming to play marathon," and they picked it up pretty quickly.
Well, I'll tell my playtesters that, because like I said, they didn't know much about it. So their main thing was, can I pick it up fast, and does it make sense to us as a player? And I'm like, great, fantastic. And it seemed to work. because they didn't come from history. So hearing some historical folks, try it and get their inputs has been really useful, because I'm sure you've experienced this, Mark, but there's not usually a huge pool of people that are super eager to play your rules and play test them and tell you, hey, you know what, those rules you put together, they suck. Try again.
Well, I have two right here. They're
Well,
not.
you're very lucky.
Yeah, they're not
Enjoy
shy.
We're always happy to give the no fun
Not shy.
review.
Yeah. All right, so we just for our viewers out there, we have a huge raft of awesome Napoleonic content coming. We went to Waterloo. We have some great Waterloo. We're going to do a Waterloo campaign. We have this crazy video where we decided what could Grouchy have marched to the guns. So if you know about Waterloo, we walked the ground. It's going to be really great. So stay tuned for that. Eric, what do you have coming up? Anything new on your raft of rules?
Well, I'm always working on stuff. But if you want to track me down, if you search Blood and Spectacles, like the glasses, you'll easily find me. I've got a War Game Vault page. I've got a Patreon. I've got a blog where I talk about war game design. I've got all that fun stuff. So you can track me down easy. So appreciate it.
All right, let us know in the comments if you want to hear more from other war game designers. We love having conversations. Thank you, Eric, and we'll see you around.
Thanks, Eric.
Yes, thank you.